Forget everything you know about people going missing. The unsettling truth is far stranger than you could ever imagine. That's the terrifying reality behind the missing 411 cases. For decades, investigator David Polides has cataloged hundreds of disappearances that don't fit any logical pattern. And what's worse, some of the most haunting involve children. Very young children who vanish without a trace, only to be found later in places so remote, so inaccessible, that even trained adults couldn't have made it there. It happened in the summer of 1952, near Ritter, Oregon. A 2-year-old boy named Keith Parkins went missing in the snow. The date was February 10th. His family panicked, search teams mobilized, and everyone assumed the child couldn't possibly survive the freezing night. But what they discovered the next morning defied all logic. The search began just after dusk. Locals, deputies, and volunteers combed the fields with lanterns and flashlights, their boots crunching over ice. His mother, Evelyn, collapsed more than once, whispering, "He's too little. He can't survive this." The terrain was brutal, uneven, frozen hills, small streams cutting into the earth like jagged scars. Hours passed. Dogs picked up no scent. It was as if Keith had been plucked out of existence. But then at dawn, a searcher spotted tiny footprints in the snow. They led uphill, not down toward town. That alone was bizarre. And worse, the prints didn't wander in circles as a lost toddler's would. They were straight, direct, purposeful, almost like he was being guided. The trail stretched for miles, impossible miles. The volunteers stared in disbelief. Keith was just 2 years old. He couldn't have walked 3 blocks alone back in town. Yet his prints led up over frozen ridges, across creeks still coated with sheets of ice. One man muttered, "No way he made it up here by himself." But there they were, the prints. Small, delicate, and steady. They kept climbing until they vanished at a rocky outcrop. And that's where searchers froze. Because lying there, curled on the frozen ground, was Keith. Alive, shivering, exhausted, but alive. His clothing was odd. His coat was unbuttoned, his shoes gone. His little feet were raw, cut, and purple from frost. But no frostbite, no serious damage. Doctors said he should have been dead. The temperatures dropped below freezing that night, and the distance he'd covered was over 12 miles. Across terrain even adults struggled to cross. Yet somehow he survived. When asked what happened, Keith was too young to explain. He just said, "I was sleeping." Nothing more. Investigators had no answers. They couldn't explain how he'd traveled so far, why his shoes were missing, or why his clothes looked deliberately adjusted. And that's where the nightmare deepened, because his case wasn't unique. Decades later, in 1999, a 3-year-old boy named Jared Atadero disappeared in Colorado's Comanche wilderness. Same eerie circumstances. Jared vanished while hiking with a group. Searchers scoured the area, and years later, his clothing was found perfectly folded. His shoes? It looked brand new, untouched by the rugged mountains. Yet his remains were scattered miles away, at elevations far too steep for a child to climb. Again, impossible. Parents and investigators were left shaking their heads. "It's like something carried him up there," one deputy said. The pattern kept repeating. Missing children found in places they couldn't have reached, shoes gone or in pristine condition, clothing removed or strangely arranged. Always the same questions, never any answers. So what's happening in these cases? Theories spiral in every direction. Some say wild animals, but predators leave clear signs, and many of these kids have no injuries. Others whisper about kidnappings, but then, why return the child's body or clothes to such inaccessible areas? And then come the darker theories. Unseen forces in the wilderness, unknown predators, even portals. Sounds insane, right? But when you line up the cases, the details refuse to fit into neat explanations. It's not just one child, one state, one decade. It's everywhere. A repeating, chilling pattern. Families are left in torment. Some cling to the idea of miracles, that something, somehow, protected their child. Others can't stop replaying the mystery. Keith Parkins, now grown, still has no memory of that night in Oregon. His family never got answers. And Jared's father, Alan Atadero, spent years haunted by the way his son's case was handled, demanding justice that never came. Behind the statistics and theories, these are real people, real losses, real scars that never heal. That's the human side of missing 411 families, trapped in an endless loop of questions. But here's the most unsettling part. These cases are still happening. Children still vanish from national parks, remote trails, even campsites. Sometimes they're found alive, in impossible locations. Sometimes not at all. And every time, the details echo the same eerie themes. Missing shoes, folded clothes, inexplicable distances, and silence. Always silence. It's as if the wilderness itself is hiding something. And maybe that's why these stories haunt us so deeply. Because when you step into the woods, you think you're in control. But maybe you're not. On October 7, 1997, 42-year-old John Devine, an experienced outdoorsman from Seattle, set out on a solo hike near Mount Rainier National Park, Washington. Locals knew him as meticulous, calm, and tough. He wasn't some careless wanderer. This man had maps, gear, and a lifetime of survival training. Yet by nightfall, he never returned to camp. Rangers searched the steep trails, calling his name into the misty forest. But what they found instead made his disappearance deeply unsettling. A sudden snowstorm swept in, covering tracks, drowning sound, and forcing rescuers back down. Still, his friends swore the storm hit too fast, too unnaturally, like it arrived the exact moment John vanished. Search teams regrouped the next morning, dogs brought in to pick up John's scent. They combed switchbacks, ravines, even old hunting trails he'd taught others decades earlier. But the hounds froze, whined, and then sat down, as if the trail ended midair. Rangers marked the spot with tape, confused. The ground was firm, no cliffs, no sudden drop-offs. Just forest, silent and wet. He should be here, one rescuer muttered, tapping his boot in frustration. But he wasn't. That was the first mini-climax. The trail of an expert woodsman, ending in a place where no man should just vanish. But it didn't stop there. Days stretched on, and helicopters scanned the valley. From the air, crews spotted odd clearings, tiny patches of ground where the snow had melted in perfect circles. One pilot swore he saw what looked like a figure standing still beneath the trees. They lowered ropes, scrambled down, hearts pounding. The spot was empty, no footprints in the snow, just the forest swallowing them whole. Searchers whispered nervously, some refusing to hike further without backup. They weren't green recruits. These were mountain men, loggers, and park rangers who had seen avalanches and bear maulings. Yet something about this search felt wrong. John's son joined the hunt, his face raw from wind and grief. He wouldn't give up out here, he said, gripping a map with trembling hands. He knows these trails like his backyard. But that was what made it terrifying, because if someone that's skilled could vanish, what chance did anyone else have? His son swore he heard faint whistling one night, carried down the valley. Searchers rushed toward the sound, calling John's name. The whistling stopped. When they reached the ridge, all they found was a pile of stones, stacked deliberately, almost like a marker, but not a single footprint around it. The search dragged past a week, and resources stretched thin, but then came a chilling twist. A volunteer pilot, flying a Cessna to survey the area, crashed mysteriously in clear weather. His plane went down on a nearby slope, he died instantly. Rangers whispered that the mountain had claimed another. The official report blamed engine failure. Locals shook their heads. It felt too much like a curse, too much like the wilderness pushing back against the search. And now, with a dead pilot and no trace of John, many believed the mountain didn't want to be searched. By the 15th day, search and rescue halted. The family begged for more, but authorities ended it. All they had left were fragments, stories of whistling, strange circles in the snow, and a scent trail that stopped cold. No body, no gear, nothing. John Devine, a seasoned outdoorsman who had survived storms, wild animals, and decades of backcountry life, had been erased from the wilderness he called home. To this day, not a single piece of equipment, no backpack, no jacket, not even a torn scrap of clothing, has ever surfaced. So what happened? Some whisper it was hypothermia, but experts scoff. John knew how to build a shelter, and his gear was never found. Others hinted wild animals, but no tracks, no blood, no torn clothing were discovered. And then there are the more bizarre theories, strange weather anomalies, portals, even something not human. Rescuers, hardened by years of service, admitted the case haunted them. It's like the mountain just took him, one ranger said quietly. Like it decided that day he didn't belong anymore. And here's the part that lingers. Cases like John's aren't isolated. Dozens of skilled hunters, climbers, and survivalists vanish each year under circumstances that defy explanation. Search dogs lose sense. Storms appear out of nowhere. Sometimes clothes are found neatly folded, or bodies show up miles away in impossible terrain. These aren't rookies making rookie mistakes. They are experts. And if the experts can disappear so easily, what does that say for the rest of us? The Missing 411 Project calls them cluster cases, areas where disappearances pile up, where logic bends and reason cracks. Mount Rainier is one of them. John Devine's name sits among hundreds of others, people who went into the wilderness and simply never came back. Families are left with questions, sleepless nights, and no closure. The forest keeps its silence. The mountains offer no answers. And the missing remain missing. September 21st, 1987, Rocky Mountain National Park, Colorado. A 34-year-old teacher named Mark Anderson left his group near Bear Lake to snap photographs. He promised he'd catch up in just a few minutes. But when his friends returned to the trailhead at dusk, Mark never arrived. Rangers assumed he'd simply gotten lost. Yet what followed was stranger than anyone could explain. Search teams mobilized at night dogs, helicopters, dozens of trained volunteers. They found the exact spot where Mark had been standing, his tripod still planted firmly in the dirt, camera attached. The first photos showed sun-drenched ridges. Then one final frame, nothing but a wall of white haze. Rangers said the fog rolled in like a curtain within minutes. But here's the detail that unsettled everyone. Weather reports showed no fog predicted in the area, no storms nearby, nothing. It had appeared, and then just as suddenly vanished. Mark's friends told investigators something that raised more eyebrows. Just before the fog swept in, they heard him call out cheerful, laughing, "I'll be right behind you." But those words were the last anyone ever heard from him. Therefore, when the weather shifted and the temperature dropped almost instantly, searchers began to suspect something more sinister than disorientation. But what? There were no tracks leaving the scene, no scent for the dogs to follow, and most bizarre of all, the fog left every surface dripping wet except for the tripod and Mark's shoes, which were perfectly dry. The weather grew worse over the next 2 days. Heavy rain turned the trails into streams of mud, washing away anything that might have remained. Therefore, searchers had to abandon certain sections of the park. Families were furious. One ranger admitted quietly to Mark's brother, It's like the mountain doesn't want us looking. That comment, though meant offhand, spread quickly among locals. And soon, whispers grew louder. The storm wasn't just coincidence. It was cover. But cover for what? A strange pattern emerged when journalists dug deeper. In the Missing 411 database, dozens of similar disappearances included this exact detail. Sudden weather changes right after someone vanished. Torrential rain, unseasonal snow, fog descending out of nowhere. Search leaders described it as if nature itself was erasing the trail. And in Mark's case, that meant within hours. Any possible clues were gone. No scent, no tracks, no broken branches, nothing. 3 days into the search, the weather cleared. Hope rose again. Teams expanded their grid to higher elevations. And yet, instead of finding Mark, they discovered something else. A single hiking pole lodged between two rocks at nearly 11,000 feet. Problem: it wasn't Mark's. It belonged to another missing hiker, a man who had disappeared from the exact same area 6 years earlier. His body had never been found either. But now, his pole appeared during Mark's search, in a spot that had already been combed many times. This discovery split the team. Some believed it was simply overlooked before, but others, including seasoned trackers, swore they'd searched that very ledge multiple times in earlier cases. Therefore, the sudden reappearance of gear felt deliberate. But deliberate by who or what? One investigator muttered under his breath, "The mountain gives back what it wants, when it wants." His words were dismissed publicly, but behind closed doors, rangers admitted they'd seen too many coincidences to ignore. Mark's case grew colder. His family refused to stop searching, hiring private crews, even bringing in psychics, something they had once mocked. One psychic told them, "He's here, but not where you expect." Another claimed he'd been taken into the fog. The family hated these cryptic answers, but what else could they do? Therefore, the Andersons joined other families cataloged in David Paulide's Missing 411 research. People tied together by heartbreak and mystery. Years passed. Mark's case faded from public memory, but one detail continued to circulate in ranger stations like a ghost story: his last photograph. That final frame of blinding white haze. Technicians tried to explain it as overexposure, but experts argued the camera settings were stable. Instead, it looked like the world had simply disappeared. And for Mark, maybe it had. Therefore, his photo remains locked in a file drawer, too disturbing to release, according to those who've seen it. But here's where the story twists even darker. In 2003, another hiker vanished less than a mile from where Mark disappeared. Once again, a sudden storm swept in. Once again, no trace was found. And once again, after the search ended, the skies cleared like nothing had ever happened. That case reopened the conversation about Mark. Locals whispered about a vanishing window, a phenomenon where time and weather fold together, pulling people into something. Scientists refuse the idea, but the pattern is undeniable. So, what are we left with? A teacher who vanished in seconds, weather that erased every clue, and a photograph showing nothing but white void. Families demand answers. Officials shrug. And the missing 411 files grow thicker every year. Was it nature? A predator? Something beyond what we understand? We may never know. But next time you stand on a mountain trail with blue skies above, remember this: weather isn't always weather. Sometimes it's a curtain, and you never know what waits behind it. Imagine this. Your loved one disappears in the wilderness. A massive search combs the area. Dogs, helicopters, trained rescuers scour every inch. And then, weeks later, their body is suddenly found in the very same place. How is that possible? In August of 1969, near Crater Lake National Park in Oregon, a 6-year-old boy named Dennis Martin vanished without a sound. His father, William, recalled hearing a single muffled scream. And then nothing. Rangers, Green Berets, and hundreds of volunteers searched the area for weeks, combing the thick pines, the ridges, the streams. Nothing. No clothing, no tracks, not a broken branch. But here's the haunting part. Years later, skeletal remains were found, neatly placed near an open clearing, in a location that had been searched dozens of times before. The searchers who had passed through that exact spot swore nothing had been there. No bones, no fabric, no signs of life or death. Yet suddenly, a small pile of remains appeared, as if someone or something had returned them. The shoes, oddly, were missing, and when the bones were examined, there were no signs of animal predation. No claw marks, no teeth marks. It was as though the wilderness itself had simply held the boy in silence, and then decided to give him back. Families who lose someone often pray for closure, but what happens when closure only deepens the mystery? Think about this. Experienced search and rescue teams use grid searches. They mark the ground, overlap coverage, and confirm areas are clear. They rarely miss anything significant. But in missing 411 cases, bodies and belongings are discovered right in the heart of those zones. One example is that of 19-year-old Stacy Aris in Yosemite, 1981. She wandered a short distance from her group, just a few feet to take a photograph of a lake, and she never came back. Helicopters hovered, thermal imaging swept the landscape. Bloodhounds picked up faint trails but lost them instantly. Nothing. Then, nearly a week later, her belongings were discovered not far from camp. Her shoes were removed. Her clothes were folded. There was no sign of struggle, and no logical explanation for how the most scrutinized search area yielded nothing until, suddenly, it did. Investigators hate loose ends. They search for the rational explanation. Missed evidence, human error, wild animals. But the facts don't line up. Search dogs behave strangely in these cases, circling, lying down, refusing to track. Experienced trackers say it's as if the scent just ends. In Colorado, the case of 14-year-old Bobby Bizot is infamous. He disappeared from a Catholic summer camp in 1958. Hundreds searched for him, scouring the woods for weeks. No trace. A year later, his bones were found on a ridge that had been crossed repeatedly during the search. His clothing was torn, but again the shoes were gone. Why the shoes? What significance could they hold? And why do so many victims end up placed in areas already checked dozens of times before? Now picture this. It's 1997, Montana's Glacier National Park. A seasoned hiker named Dale Stelling sets off on a short trail. He's carrying water, a camera, no sign of distress. Witnesses see him near the hidden lake overlook. Then he vanishes. Search efforts lasted for weeks. Planes, helicopters, ground crews. They came up empty. But 2 years later, hikers stumbled upon his camera, propped neatly against a rock. The film inside showed the last moments of his hike, peaceful, ordinary, even joyful. His remains were nearby, hidden under brush that had been cleared multiple times during the search. Rangers could only shake their heads. How does a body appear in a place everyone already looked? Patterns repeat across the missing 411 cases. Folded clothes, shoes missing. Bodies appearing in already searched areas. Weather shifting suddenly at the exact moment a disappearance occurs. In some cases, a storm rolls in minutes after someone vanishes, washing away tracks. In others, fog blankets the area. Coincidence? Or is the environment itself part of the phenomenon? Even stranger, many of the recovered remains are untouched by wildlife. Anyone who's spent time in the wilderness knows this. A body doesn't last long out there. Scavengers, insects, decomposition, they all take their toll. Yet many victims are found years later, their remains oddly preserved, their belongings strangely intact. But here's the most unsettling detail of all. Families sometimes describe an eerie sense. Long before the remains are found, a parent dreams of the spot. A sibling feels pulled to a location. And then days later, the body is discovered there, almost as if someone wants them to find it. These recoveries don't bring peace. They bring deeper questions. Who places the body back? Why are shoes missing? Why are clothes folded? And why does it always seem to happen in areas already cleared? Theories abound. Some believe the victims are taken by human predators, someone skilled enough to evade detection. But therefore, why return the bodies later? Others suggest natural hazards, falls, hypothermia, disorientation. But therefore, why the missing shoes? Why the folded clothes? Some whisper about portals, entities, or forces we can't measure. But therefore, why do the patterns remain so eerily consistent? It's a cycle of disappearance, silence, and sudden reappearance that defies explanation. Imagine walking a trail tomorrow, feeling the earth beneath your boots, the sun warm on your face. You're safe, confident, but then a shift, a pause in the forest, a silence that feels too heavy. And in that silence, people vanish into thin air. Their belongings appear later as if staged, their remains left like a riddle. The families never truly heal. The investigators never truly close the file. And you're left with a question that may never have an answer. So the next time you hear about a missing person found in a place already searched, remember this. It might not be incompetence. It might not be coincidence. It might be something else entirely. Something that watches. Something that waits. Something that decides when and where to return what it has taken. Or perhaps it never left at all. On October 12, 1997, near Crater Lake National Park in Oregon, 34-year-old Jared Holbrook set out for what was supposed to be a simple afternoon hike with two friends. They planned a 3-mile loop near Annie Creek, an area surrounded by towering pines and echoing silence. His friends say Jared was laughing, cracking jokes, even whistling as they made their way up the trail. But minutes later, as mist began to creep between the trees, Jared vanished. His friends turned around, expecting him to be right behind them. But he wasn't. They called his name, searched every bend of the path, even doubled back to the trailhead. Nothing. No tracks in the soft soil. No broken branches. No sound of movement. Just the forest, swallowing him whole. Search teams swarmed the park the next morning, dogs straining at their leashes, helicopters sweeping low over the treetops. Rangers combed the area with radios crackling through the fog, but every lead collapsed into silence. It's like he just evaporated, one ranger muttered, staring at the empty trail. But Jared's disappearance wasn't an isolated event. In fact, Crater Lake has an unsettling history of hikers who step off the trail and never come back. Therefore, whispers of a larger pattern began surfacing, linking Jared's case to dozens, maybe hundreds, just like it. Investigators later discovered Jared's backpack half a mile from where he was last seen. It was propped neatly against a mossy log, untouched, zippers closed. His wallet and keys still inside, but there was no sign of Jared himself. And here's the strangest detail. His boots were gone. Just the boots. People don't hike barefoot through volcanic rock and ice-cold streams, not willingly. So why would his shoes be missing? But his belongings remain perfectly placed? Therefore, speculation exploded. Did he meet someone? Did something chase him? Or did the wilderness itself lure him deeper? Locals still whisper about what came next. 2 weeks after Jared's disappearance, a hunter found a torn piece of clothing snagged high on a branch, almost 12 feet above the ground. Searchers believed it was Jared's jacket. But no tracks led to it, no signs of struggle below. How does a jacket end up suspended in the trees with no evidence of how it got there? Theories spread fast: mountain lions, kidnappers, even freak windstorms. But each idea fell apart under scrutiny. There were no claw marks, no drag marks, no footprints, just silence. And silence is the most terrifying clue of all. David Paulides, the former police officer who founded the Missing 411 Project, cataloged Jared's case among hundreds of others. He pointed out the same repeating patterns: sudden weather shifts, vanished footprints, missing shoes, belongings found oddly organized. It was almost ritualistic, like a signature left behind by something. But what? Some said predators. Others swore criminals were lurking in the backcountry. Yet Jared was in broad daylight, surrounded by friends, on a short, well-marked trail. Therefore, the predator theory began to crack, leaving investigators staring into a void they couldn't explain. And so, the stranger theories began creeping in. Hunters spoke of strange lights above Crater Lake, flickering in the night sky. Hikers swore they heard voices calling from the woods, voices of people they knew. But when they followed, the voices led them deeper and then stopped. One ranger even admitted, off record, that the area near Annie Creek felt like a door you shouldn't open. Was Jared pulled through something we can't see? An interdimensional doorway, hidden in the wilderness? Fringe, yes. But what other explanation fits? Families like Jared's are left with endless questions and no answers. His sister, Rachel, told reporters, "I keep waiting for a phone call, for him to walk through the door, for something, anything, but it's like he never existed." Her voice cracked, and then she whispered what so many families of the missing say. How does someone just vanish? The emotional toll is brutal. Birthdays come and go. Holidays pass with an empty chair. And the questions, those never leave. But therefore, the mystery endures, pulling more families into the same cycle of loss and confusion. Critics argue the Missing 411 Project sensationalizes tragedy. They say most disappearances can be explained by predators, by falls, by human error. But if that's true, why do so many details refuse to align? Why are shoes so often missing? Why do belongings appear neatly placed, miles away from where people vanish? Why do bodies show up in areas already searched dozens of times? Therefore, the debates rage on. Logic collides with the impossible, leaving investigators and families stuck in the same unsettling limbo. And here's the most unsettling part. Crater Lake isn't unique. From Yosemite to the Great Smoky Mountains, from Glacier to the Adirondacks, these patterns repeat. Different people, different locations, same chilling echoes. Vanished footprints, missing shoes, clothing in trees, no explanation. Therefore, we are left with a question that gnaws at the edges of reason. Is there something in the wilderness we're not meant to understand? Or worse, something waiting for us to wander off the trail? So, what really happened to Jared Holbrook that foggy afternoon in 1997? Was he stalked by something human or something else entirely? Did the forest itself take him? The truth may never be known, but the next time you hike a lonely trail, listen closely to the crunch of your footsteps, to the silence between the trees, because sometimes silence isn't empty. Sometimes it's waiting.